Well, good morning, everybody. I've been looking forward to this forecast video all week, and that was because the scheduled release of the Colorado State University hurricane seasonal forecast was expected to come out, and it did yesterday. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for the guy that produces that forecast. His name is Phil Klotzbeck, and I want to talk about his analog years. Now, we're going to use it to understand the hurricane season, but I also want to talk to you about where I think it's going in terms of maybe summer temperature and precipitation patterns ahead of the hurricane season. So, we'll get to that here. If you just need that long range, go right here. I hope you find it quite fascinating. A lot of that discussion is going to be about the placement of this. Honestly, for the next 9 months, it's going to be Bermuda High discussion. And today it's here. And what it is doing is it's opened up the Gulf, and it's giving us what we call a deformation zone. Now, we talk a lot about these in winter, but it's basically where the atmosphere is kind of putting this squeeze right in through a region where we're getting just a lot of frontogenesis, the creation of a front. And along that front, we're going to be pumping moisture in from the Gulf just nonstop for the next few days. And where that is set up, it's going to be incredibly heavy rainfall. Now, we do have some snow because there's some cold air coming in behind this, but some new information coming out about the end of April and temperature. We're going to cover that in just a few minutes as well. And again, a lot of this is going to be about just where is the transport of heat and moisture coming from across the planet. All right, so here we go. This is what this looks like yesterday. This was fascinating. So while we watched yet another day, I believe we're up over 2,000 reports of severe weather since last Friday. But what we watched yesterday here was just, look at these cloud streets. That is your Gulf moisture. Watch this back and forth. Just riding into this front on which storms are kind of popping off the boundary. And we saw, again, more severe weather yesterday. But I wanted you to see the influence of that ridge that's sitting off the southeast coast. Just amazing. I could watch this all day long. Fascinating to watch this occur. In addition to that, we just saw rain, just a tremendous amount of it already falling. And this is kind of the second big push of heavy rainfall. And some of this is what's key. Some of this because of the speed of this last low. Well, it's not the last, but this next low that came through the Four Corner states and ejected into Texas. We saw rain that got into the Dakotas. We saw some that got into parts of Nebraska. This was one of our driest spots right here, grabbing some rainfall. Came out of parts of Colorado. Take a look at this part of Texas. This is what we were waiting on, but we know this is going to ride this pressure trough right in through here. That's that deformation zone, that frontogenesis area. And that's why we're expecting the major flooding to continue throughout this area as we go forward into this forecast. How much has already fallen? Well, this is a 7-day observed total precipitation map from MRMS. Now, just want to be clear, I make them every morning at 12:01 a.m. So that's how often I make them. So you can just see our last 7 days at 12 a.m. this morning. I wanted to point out just a few things as you look at this map. Again, some of these holes being filled in that needed to be filled in, but more rain has fallen since this occurred. We're still quite dry through this corridor here. You can also see the southwest still showing up quite dry, and there are pockets throughout the southeast that are dry. But here into parts of the mid-south, we can kind of get a little better view of that if I show you my southeastern view of this. We've already had, and this is ahead of the rains coming today, tomorrow, and Sunday, we've already had some places in through here that have picked up, 6 in some locations approaching 10 inches of rain. And so more is coming, which means the flood threat is going to continue to be not just substantial, but almost historic in some cases right in through this part of the Mid-South, especially coming out of Arkansas into western Tennessee, into central Kentucky, also southern Illinois, the Boot Heel, Missouri, and parts of Indiana, expected to grab a lot of rain as well. You can see early this morning, 5:30 a.m., we do have a broad area of flood watches. There's already a bunch of flood warnings in through here. We have severe thunderstorm watch on the back side of this, including some pretty powerful storms that are rolling through here right now. And then take a look at this. On the very back side of this, we do have an area that is under winter weather advisories here. We have a winter storm watch that is located right in through this area. And we just need to be aware of the winter storm warning that's on the back side. I'm going to show you what that looks like in just a few moments. Outside of that, just a couple of other areas of some winter weather up farther to the north, and I'll show you how that shakes down in a moment. On the lead edge of this, we do have another day with a large area of moderate risk of severe storms, and this leaves parts of Texas, gets through most of Arkansas into Missouri. So again, this will be adding to over 2,000 reports of severe weather we've had already, including some absolutely horrific tornadoes, which I'm sure you've seen throughout the news media. Now, as you watch this, okay, just again, if you're in this area, have multiple ways to stay weather aware today. Weather radios, tune into weather.gov, your local forecasters. I know there's a lot of YouTube forecasters out there that follow this stuff like every single event. Just keep in tune with those folks, okay? What we then see is tomorrow, this would be on Saturday, we're going to keep an eye from Louisiana all the way up through parts of like Memphis and western Tennessee. This is how slow this front is. And then finally, as we get into the day on Sunday, this is severe weather threat moves into parts of the southeast. You can see the influence of that ridge, though. See how it's just preventing, getting these huge storms right up here along the coast, which has been one of our more drier areas. Now, I want to show you the timing of this just by looking at the high-res NAM. Okay, so let's start this off. Let's get you queued up at about 7 a.m. Here it is. Now, many of you on the backside are going to be watching the snow on this, the snow that's going through parts of the upper Midwest, the snow that takes shape in southern Colorado and down here into parts of New Mexico and eventually into Texas. But the heavy rains stretching into this area are going to be quite impressive. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not looking forward to this forecast for many reasons. Setting aside all of the agronomic reasons and all of this kind of flooding is not just dangerous. It is it's catastrophic in places. But I'm supposed to be down here in Edwardsville, Illinois all weekend at a soccer tournament. And it's going to be wet. I think they're expecting 4 to 7 inches of rain down there. So we'll see how well I do. I'll be sure to take my camera so we can grab some pictures of what this is going to look like. But that's not to make light of this situation. I just want to let you know I'll be in it with you. But take a look at the backside. There's that snow. New Mexico, the panhandles. This is 7 a.m. on Saturday morning. And there's our last push of this moisture coming through by Saturday night, getting into early Sunday morning. So just we've got this coming, and it's coming through pretty quickly. Total precipitation-wise, this is just the high-res NAM's forecast of it. And what you start to see in the high-res NAM is that corridor right in through there jumping up on my 6 to 10 inch range. And you know that just south of there, we just saw places that picked up 6 to 10 inches of rain. But this is desperately needed. Some of that's coming in the form of snow, and just to show you that, here's the high-res NAM's view of that snow. So I'm watching most carefully right into this region for the snow. So please be aware of what we're expecting here. Okay, bigger picture view of this. This is just the next 7 days on the whole from the WPC. And as we just take a look at it again, Arkansas, Boot Hill, Missouri, Western Kentucky, Tennessee, certainly going to be squarely in the crosshairs of where the heaviest precipitation is going to be. And I want to point out why this is so critical. If we look back at February, March, and now the first 3 days of April, this has been one of our driest regions. And we just put down precipitation here. Some came into parts of Nebraska and Kansas. We're about to hit this region with much, much more flooding. It doesn't quite make it all the way to the southeast, but this is pushing in on these regions here that have been dry in parts of Ohio, West Virginia, and parts of Pennsylvania. You're going to see in the week 2 forecast better moisture is attempting to come into parts of the northern plains. And while a big chunk of that February was quite wet here, just take a look at the difference from one side to the other to parts of Montana with respect to precipitation. And I find this map quite fascinating to discover the end of winter and the beginning of spring, how the precipitation patterns have set up. The new drought monitor was released. Very little change overall in the drought monitor. We're still hovering around 45% of the land area in D1 to D4 drought. But this moisture coming in right here, right now is going to be key on some of these areas. Now, what I'm most concerned is the evolution of this map through the remainder of spring. And right now, the National Weather Service and the CPC, their seasonal drought outlook looks something like this. So they are maintaining the thought that drought is going to stay in this corridor. It's going to stay across parts of the northern plains. It will be relieved here and throughout pockets of the east. But if we have this much drought that just lingers all the way to the end of June, the question is when you get into summer, where we get into just pure convective mode in terms of the atmosphere's ability to return moisture to the surface. I mean, it's just thunderstorms. Then what happens is your large drought areas have a difficult time being eroded because of the hyperlocal nature by which thunderstorms deliver their moisture. Now, there is one thing I want to point out about what's going on up here in the northern plains and upper Midwest, and that is we do have some snow on the ground. If you take a look, there's anywhere between 0.2 and over an inch of liquid in the snow that is in parts of the Dakotas, Minnesota, and Wisconsin from these last couple of systems that have come through. And as that snow melts, we talked about this on Monday, that frost line is deep now, right? It is relatively deep. meaning we will work some of that moisture in to kind of eliminate some of the holes that still sit here with respect to moisture. And I was in Minnesota last week, and I'll tell you, it looks pretty good, to be honest with you, in terms of the moisture. But you can still see this whole region throughout the plains, pockets throughout the southeast to the mid-Atlantic that are still suffering with moisture. Take a look at the pockets in Montana as well. And we know that we're going to have flooding through here. We are completely saturated, but this idea of returning moisture to some key areas, some of it via snow, some of it via rain, it's been a godsend this springtime frame. Now, what we can thank for that is this big looping pattern of the jet stream in the Pacific. We talked about the big wave break event, the split that's in the flow. It is still here, okay? But it's now beginning to transform. So we got a whole week of that, which we talked about all week. This is what led to all the severe weather. But as this broader ridge works its way in, it is going to change the pattern for day 4 through 10, which I'll show you in just a few moments. So the Pacific jet behavior continues to be a dominant factor. You say, well, what's controlling it? I do not know. I spent a week trying to piecemeal together the constructive or deconstructive parts of the atmosphere, like the MJO or things going on in the North Atlantic, North Pacific. And I'll be honest, I'm just in a mode where I'm trying to stay on top of what the jet's going to be doing. But that loopy behavior, okay, these big, large trough ridges are going to come into the United States, settling the pattern down day 4 through 10. And this is what it's going to do. There's the European model solution for the troughs and ridges. So here is through Sunday. There's the last bit of moisture pushing through that pressure trough fed on the Bermuda High. Then we get into Monday, Tuesday. That comes in some colder air. We're going to talk about where that frost line gets to here. I think Tuesday morning is going to be one of our coldest mornings if you're east of the Rocky Mountains. Really over here in the Mississippi, Ohio Valley, southeast into the east, okay? But what I do notice is that by next Wednesday, large ridge builds in. So we're going to warm this up quickly. The cooler air will exit east, but this is northwest flow and it's going to be drier. And that's through about April 10th. That ridge then opens in the midsection of the country, so this is a relatively brief cool down for this area. We already start to see the temperatures rebounding relatively quickly at that time right in through here. We'll see the northwest probably clipping into better precipitation in week 2, but a lot of the country is going to be drier. Now what I'm waiting to see is if Sunday the 13th through the 14th drives this trough that's in the ensembles through the northern plains, because we have drought issues here, so we would need to see that come through April 14th. But it is after this mid to late April time frame, where the precip and the temperature patterns are huge for the corn belt, soybean belt, the plains, the Midwest, the upper Midwest, the East for planting a crop. So let's talk about it here and try to figure out where it's going to go. This is the day 4 through 10 I mentioned. So remember, at that time, I told you the Northwest gets it, but this ridge builds in. The warmth starts in the west, but spreads east with time, but we're drier. And we need this. We're going to need this time frame to dry out. But we'll talk more about week 2 in just a moment. Okay, GFS left, European right. We know how this is going to go. We've seen through Saturday into Sunday, and here we are into Monday. Now, by Monday, the front is trying to clear the southeast. We need this moisture in pockets of the southeast here. It's got to come through. Could there be some snow in the interior of the northeast? Yes. Is there a little clipper coming through the backside into lower Michigan? It is in both models. We'll take a look at the snowfall total in a moment. But then we see our system coming through here, okay? But this high pressure cell is what's key. So it's going to push most of this to the north, not letting it come down into California. Now what we have happening here is that by next Wednesday, there is a little clipper. The GFS is quicker with it than the European, but it's trying to bring in next Thursday, so from Wednesday to Thursday, some moisture into this corridor. Take a look at where it is in the GFS. But after that, we're not talking about a whole lot for the mid part of the country. It's just keeping an eye on that clipper. Watch it over here in the European, going into the Appalachian Mountains, into the northeast, and bringing with it some wet weather. All right? So if we look at this a couple different ways, I want to ask first, who's on the drier side of this? So over the next 10 days, this is the probability of staying under a half inch. All right, so we can now see the influence of the ridge dry here. We're drier in parts of Montana. And I know you got a system coming through after this, after April 14th, but we're drier there. And everywhere that you see white is where it's going to be very, very wet. Now I'm going to flip this over to 1 inch, but it should reset the model, which it did. So let's go back and grab the previous run, which will give us out there to 10 days. This is the probability of an inch in the next 10 days, most of this coming in the next 3. That's 2 inches, 4 inches. This is 4 additional inches of rainfall compared to what you've already gotten and 8. We cannot ignore that the possibility coming out of Arkansas is still for another 8 inches of rainfall. I'll leave you on the 2-inch mark, though, just to kind of see this broad area of flooding that we're expecting. All right. Now, there is some snow with this. Let's go ahead and look at the model forecast, the ECMWF. As I mentioned, some interior snows in the northeast, some coming through Ontario into Quebec. We did note that that system that comes out of New Mexico into Texas could spread some snow to here. How much? 2, 3, 4 inches. It's going to be short-lived, but take note that it is trying to pull some of that white stuff into here as well. Maybe a couple more inches up north as well, but most of the west is not experiencing much in the way of additional snowfall. Okay, we're building in a ridge. There's going to be warmer temperatures. So I do want to come back and let's just flip this off of precipitation and look at the probability, not percentile, probability for winter. And let's ask it who's going to get about 2 inches, at least a chance for 3 inches of snow over the next 10 days. And now you can see those same corridors kind of showing up. All right. So where do we go from here? The week 2 pattern, remember what we talked about. Let's just choose, I'll choose the European just as an example. In week 2, starting on like the 13th and 14th, we have flow coming into the northwest, and this little clipper that's going to sneak through, that's the position of the trough going right in through this area. So we're going to warm up quickly down south, and I'm a big area. This is I'm south of this, but the Canadian Prairie could be picking up some much needed moisture during this time frame for week 2. That's the 12th through the 18th. A lot of this coming the 13th and the 14th. Okay. If we look out there farther, I still have this week on, week off mentality. So this is week on, right? That's week 2. So remember, this is when you have a little system coming through here, but very dry where we need to dry back out. If we get out there farther, watch what happens after the 21st. Now, while the west likely, it's normal to have a seasonal transition at the end of April for drier conditions here. But just take a look. At the end of April, we're beginning to open this up back into more active wet weather. Where are we? This is like the last week of April. So Easter and after, keep an eye on this region. But that's going to make me question what the temperatures are going to do during that time frame. And as we just let this continue to slide into May, the model really loses a signal, except it is trying to keep a corridor in through here wetter. And that's this whole tight spring window analog thought process now being verified by the models in this region. Now I'm going to show you the CFSV2 in a moment, but I want to get into some other stuff real quick. You say, well, Eric, how much of influence is the MJO having on this? I don't even know. It's been here all week, and the longer range models are killing it. They're dropping it into null space, and so I can't use it. We're getting a transition right now in our global wind oscillation. We're seeing a transition under global angular momentum. That's what happens in spring. But man, is it forcing me to lose any sort of predictability out there too far. So what I want to do is I want to come back to what we feel more comfortable with, which is this map, which is the next 7 days of frost risk. Now, as we talked about, we know that especially next Tuesday, we're going to drop some cold air down here. We may get some of that cold air, that frost risk close to Atlanta, clips a lot of North Carolina, northern South Carolina, a lot of Arkansas, all of Oklahoma, big chunk of Texas. So there's some cold air coming in with this. If we go and look at the timing, this is the National Digital Forecast Database today. So you find the boundary. It's easy. Here it is tomorrow. Look at that cold air supportive of the snow we talked about. These are high temperatures tomorrow that are 30 degrees colder than normal down here. Watch the west warm up. This is Sunday into Monday. See this warmth coming through? Look at the cool air behind this. That's April 7th, Monday. This is the cool morning that I'm concerned about the frost threat getting down here. But there's the warm-up we mentioned. There's the warm-up we're talking about. So that's Tuesday, April 8th, 9th, 10th. And a lot of folks, once you get out to the 10th, are going to be wondering, have we lost our frost? Because, if you're north of this line, there's a good chance you could have another frost after April 10th, right? That happens. But for many of you south of this, you're past your climatological average first frost date. Now, it's tricky in the mountains, always tricky in the mountains. That's why I started the line here. But as we look out there to that longer time frame, take a look. There's the temperature matrix. Now notice day 5 through 10 in each of these, cold air exiting east. We know this is coming. This is the next 5 days. But look at day 10 through 15. That gets you out to the 19th of April. And we do not have a cold signal in the models yet. Now, you know that the European is going to do this. This is this week. There's the warm-up next week. Here's that third week of April. It's trying to drop cool weather back in here. But we've not been able to trust this model much at all since the end of March, right? And I want to show you something. This is the temperature forecast that just came out from the CFSV2, the 18th through the 24th, the 25th through May 1st. So here's what I want to tell you all. If you're sitting in this area and you're wanting to get after this crop early, and you know your insurance dates come up, and so we're looking at these temperatures and seeing two different models giving you two different things. What I'm going to tell you is watch the weekend trends through midweek next week. And if I continue to show you this warm-up for the end of April, then that is a better go signal than not. And remember, when you get to the end of April, cold weather can only come in. It typically only comes in for like a day or two. It's just the frost threat once the crop has emerged. But this is a much different solution on the week 3, week 4 in the CFSV2 than it is in the European model, which again, I've had some major trust issues with on this cool down that you see here. Precipitation-wise, the European model, the CFSV2, still keeping it very stormy here for the end of April and the beginning of May. But that gets us into this bigger discussion. May, June, July, August, where are things going? And I'm going to use the work of Phil to talk about this, Phil Klotzbach. Now, this is his new forecast. I have tremendous respect for this guy. And what he's got is his 2025 hurricane activity. This is all him. So you can see the averages over here for each of these categories by which we measure the hurricane seasonal strength. Named storms, 2.5, 3 more than average. Days, 69 is the average, 85 is his projection. Hurricanes 9, 7.2 is average. You can see them all the way down through each category. They're all above the historical averages. And what I find fascinating about his discussion is it comes down to some stuff that we've been discussing. And let me just show it to you real quick. Okay, if you just go to Ag Weather, click on More Weather, slide down here, it's been a lot of discussing about this. Where is La Nina going? Because midsummer ocean temperatures are critical to this whole thing, both in the Atlantic and the Pacific. So right now, he's focusing a lot on the current state of the Atlantic and the future state of the Pacific, which, if we do see a higher probability as we go into these months of more neutral to La Nina conditions versus building an El Nino, this would be an increase in hurricane risk activity, and that's what he's starting to see here. Now, what I found fascinating was the analog years that he used. So I'm going to borrow Phil's analogs. These are his, all right, but they make sense to me. They are the years of 1996, 99, 06, 08, 11, and 17. And in April during those years, there was a warm-up in the ocean here, some cooler water lingered, and we had a fading La Nina. So we were starting to warm up over here, but a fading La Nina. Now, if that looks familiar, that's because that's what we've seen since January. We've had some cooler water show up at times here. See it? Some cool water that's extended here as our La Nina has faded. And there's this warm swath in through there. Now, big difference, it's much warmer here this year than it was in those analog years put together as a composite. But there are good reasons why Phil chose these years, 96, 99, 06, 8, 11, and 17 as his best analogs. And let's get into what this might possibly mean. Because by June, this is what I'm going to be watching here and here. This is the warm-up, but if this cools down and this cools down, that is a signal for the replacement or the adjustment in the placement of our big subtropical summer ridges. So I need to talk to you about this because this is what happens when you put all those years together. Look at June, July, and August. There they are, for where we have our subtropical highs. Here's one. Here's the Bermuda high, which you'll notice is not home. And here's possibly the position of the third. So that gives you an atmospheric flow pattern that would do something like this. And what I want to know is this high pressure cell going to be here? Will it be in the southern plains? Will it be west? Will it be in the Midwest? Will it be in the I don't know. I'm just going to show you a couple things, but watch this. When you stitch all the years together and you see this as your composite, remember each individual year looked different, so I made a group of them. And take a look. 1996, where was the ridge placement in the United States? It was along the West Coast. What about 1999? Deep trough on the West Coast. That was a cool, wet summer with a big ridge over the Great Lakes. That was an interesting year. What about we come up here to 2006? This is actually a year that I'm worried about. Ridge number 1, big ridge in the central Canadian Prairie 2, Bermuda High lost over in the North Atlantic. That was a hot and dry summer for the northern plains. 2008, deep trough here, but it just extended. Look at that. That is a weird analog to this whole scenario. Look at 2011, though. Now, we remember this as the year that the drought moved on this ridge out of Texas into Oklahoma, Kansas, Arkansas, and just built. Why? Big ridge upstream, no Bermuda High. Where was it? It was fumbling around in Greenland. And then I want to show you lastly 2017. Now, 17 was interesting because it was a large ridge on the west coast, but it was expansive in its size. And that's why we clipped the western Corn Belt with dry conditions in 17. But that was a weird beginning, middle, and end of those years. I wanted to show you the individual ones because I need to now put them into composite. This is what happened in July of all of those years when you put them together with respect to temperatures. There were hot summers in the midsection of the country, cooler along the west. Look at that. That's a hot July being forecast when you stitch all those years together. You say, well, what about the precipitation pattern? We were drier here and here, and wetter there, and active southwest monsoon here. You say, well, how do you get this? You get this with the ridge being placed right in this area. That opens up the flow to an active southwest monsoon. That produces ridge riding storms that come over the top and hit this area or hit the northwest. That is what those years composite look like for precipitation in July. Temperature, precipitation. So Phil, thank you for your work, because I've struggled with finding analog years. I'm going to use yours. I like these. These make sense. If you said which one of these sticks out to you most, is 2006. All right. From there, what happened in August through October, the heart of the hurricane season? Now, I'm going to tell you more about that hurricane season soon, but I want you to see how wet the Northeast was. We had systems in these years that clipped Florida and hit the Gulf Coast. But we were dry throughout the Mississippi Basin, very stormy in the plains. The West, early onset dry season. Late onset dry season. Oh, this is a fascinating group of years. Now, with all that being said, can I show you this? When you stitch all of those years together, March to April, drier, very wet. Wetter than average. Wet. Does that not look very close to what we're dealing with right now? So Phil, well done. I think that your constructed analogs here are good. And I think that we'll talk more about this hurricane season you come up with soon, because I buy into what you're saying. But that's July precip, that's July temperatures. And I can't ignore your expertise in this. So what does it mean elsewhere around the world? Well, in South America, we tended in April and May to be drier into Argentina and risk drier over here on the eastern side of their corn and soybean belt in Brazil, not in Mato Grosso, not down to Paraná. That's the key growing areas with the most acreage and biggest production numbers. But we've been watching this area because of drought that has formed there. And over the next couple of weeks, we're wetter in through here, but this is a wetter signal. We're drier into Argentina. So there's some resemblance to these analog years and what's going on in South America right now. If I had to find problem areas, though, it's down in Argentina. It's not through Brazil's growing area. So with all of that, I hope you'll have a great weekend. Please stay safe with respect to the severe storms coming up and the flooding in the MidSouth. And we'll talk more about this pattern, its evolution next week. Have a good one. Thanks.